So Rachel Reeves has delivered her first spring statement. It was always billed as a focus on spending rather than tax, and so it proved to be. There was a lot of grandstanding, as you'd expect from any Chancellor, about falling waiting lists and more NHS appointments, breakfast clubs, and the usual political nonsense. But I think there were some stings in the tail in this particular statement. The OBR, for example, have halved the growth forecast for the next year, and that's got to be a concern for businesses, employees, and of course for those with mortgages as well. Moving into perhaps some of the detail, there would have been well-trailed cuts to the welfare budget, and again, she didn't fail to deliver. The health element of the universal credit for new claimants is going to be cut to £50 and frozen until 2029-30. That in itself will save about £3 billion. And also changes to the personal independence payment assessment will raise another £4.5 billion. That is making it more difficult for people to claim these particular payments. There are some measures, though, from the previous government that she's not going to be implementing. So that means the net benefit savings are going to be £4.8 billion by 2029-30. So it's taking 5 years to bring these benefit changes in. That might sound like a lot of money, but when the government spends hundreds and hundreds of billions every year, it's a little bit of a pimple, really. Let's be honest. There were some further measures around spending as well. The government is going to launch a transformation fund. I'm sorry, I sound sceptical, don't I? Well, this is a fund to promote the reduction in the size of government. They're going to spend £3.25 billion. You use digital technology, use AI, and hopefully reduce the size of government, which will mean that by 2029-30, they're saving £6.1 billion a year in terms of the admin that government departments have to do. Like every single Chancellor before her, in my career at least, there was talk about going after tax defaulters to raise £6.5 billion a year by 2029-30. Increasing interest rates on late paid tax, increasing penalties, more prosecutions, etc. Now, we've heard all this before. We've heard about reductions in the size of government before as well. So we'll just have to wait and see how that turns out. There was some good news, I feel, though. We've seen that the world has changed over the last couple of years, particularly since Russia invaded Ukraine, and defence was certainly a focus of this spring statement. The Chancellor talked about making Britain a defence superpower. What that means is it means there's going to be an additional award of £2.2 billion next year for the MOD, on top of the £6.4 billion already announced from 2027 onwards. I think there's a recognition in government that actually, yes, Britain does need to defend itself, but the sort of jobs that becoming a defence superpower entails creating are highly paid, highly skilled jobs. And of course, where there's highly paid jobs, there's tax to be collected as well. Planning reforms that Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, is championing also look like they're going to permanently increase GDP. By 2029-30, there'll be a permanent increase of 0.2% due to the loosening of the planning regime, and that's worth £6.8 billion a year. And a permanent increase of 0.4% of GDP within the next 10 years, which will raise about £15.1 billion. Now, of course, this is around housing targets, infrastructure spending, and generally capital investment in the housing stock. There is going to be some targeted government spending on upskilling the workforce to deliver these types of housing targets, but that spending's in the hundreds of millions versus, of course, building 1.5 million houses in the next 5 years. Again, you'd hope this will work, or at least some of it will work, but that remains to be seen. The Chancellor finished off her statement by talking about, on average, every single British worker being better off by £500 a year. My only nervousness is around how many of those workers will have kept their jobs, given the massive increase in employers' national insurance that's being brought in next week. A lot of reaffirmations of various budget announcements were made by the Chancellor. And was there a sting in the tail? Was this really about government spending rather than tax? Well, there are some interesting statements in the 44-page report that was issued to accompany this spring statement. One of those mentions ISA reform. There's been a lot of talk in the press around reducing perhaps the limits that you can put into your ISAs and retaining cash. Well, that was stated in the commentary on this spring statement. So that is certainly coming. There was also talk about potentially considering how some of the venture capital reliefs that promote startup businesses were to be implemented. We have enterprise management incentive schemes in terms of share options, enterprise investment schemes, and venture capital trusts for those investing in startup businesses. There's to be a consultation with major stakeholders about whether those reliefs are actually delivering what they should. Consultations about whether reliefs are delivering what they should are, to me, sounds like code for let's amend the reliefs and deliver less of a tax bump to those who make those type of investments. One good thing that was mentioned was there was a mention of a pathway to business rates reform. Ever since George Osborne stood up in 2010 and talked about business rates reform, we've been waiting. So let's hope that actually this government does something about it. What's missing? For me, what was missing is actually any sort of rowing back from the NI increases that are coming in next week. Those NI increases, I think, have pretty much destroyed business confidence, and therefore it remains to be seen whether a lot of the tax projections that are part of this spring statement do actually arise, because frankly, if fewer people are going to be working, fewer people are going to be paying tax. So again, a number of announcements that we are just going to have to wait and see how it pans out, I'm afraid. It didn't deliver everything we wanted, but certainly the bump to defence spending and the planning reforms are to be lauded, but of course the benefit cuts, which may well be deemed necessary, will be most unpopular in certain areas of the country.